My friends call me Larry.
I like you.
What's not to like?
You're a Jew.
I'm trying to understand anti-Semitism. I think it's pretty easy to define, but it's much more difficult to comprehend. It's such a strange and specific type of hatred directed at a relatively small group of people, yet it's big, it's worldwide, and it's current. Take a look at a particularly disturbing example of Jew hatred that I caught recently. Now, for the longest time, I had never gotten a hold of a clear, succinct explanation as to what is anti-Semitism really all about. Where does it stem from? How did it come to be? Well, recently I stumbled onto a couple of explanations, and one is from the great Thomas Sowell, and in this book, it contains a 45-page essay called Are Jews Generic? And it's pretty compelling. As usual, Thomas Sowell frames this topic in economic and sociological terms, and the explanation goes something like this. Ever since the days of antiquity, since civilizations had an economy, there have been jobs known as middleman jobs. At least that's what we call them today. And a middleman occupation would be something like retail, shopkeeping, money lending, distribution, coordinating the shipping or managing the ports. Those are middleman jobs. Now, the middleman doesn't create or produce the product. The middleman just makes the product accessible to as many people as possible or provides the financing for the production of the good or service. Described in that way, a middleman sounds like a great thing for a society and for an economy to thrive. However, historically, there's been a ton of resentment and hostility towards middleman throughout the world, and it's been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Weirdly, I can remember the first time that I heard the term middleman, it had a negative connotation. And the phrase in which I first heard the term was, cut out the middleman, remove the middleman. So even in my formative years, my whatever age, I thought that a middleman was someone that you wanted to avoid. Well, for likely thousands of years and across continents, the producers, the miners, the steel workers, the fishermen, the farmers, they had a tendency to dislike the middleman because to them, the middleman didn't do any actual good old-fashioned hard work. The middleman was just brokers and dealers who talked to people and moved the product around. And the consumer had a tendency to hate the middleman because they felt they were being ripped off. Either the retail guy was marking up prices or the money lender was gouging them through the interest on their loans. And even if it didn't seem like honest labor, the truth is those jobs were very important in bringing goods and services and financing to as many people as possible. But the larger population, the people of the Middle Ages up through the 19th century, they couldn't see the big picture. And to them, the value of these occupations was invisible and superfluous, and they developed a scorn for the middleman. And to complicate these relationships even further, the middleman happened to often be an ethnic minority. So they were easier to distinguish from the larger population, easier to target. So it was common for the middleman minority to become society's punching bag. So who are some of these middleman minorities that Thomas Sowell writes about? Well, the Chinese are one. The Chinese have had a long reputation of doing business in South Asia, in Malaysia, Indonesia. They've been subjected to mob violence, and weirdly, in some parts, they've been nicknamed the Jews of the Orient. The Tamils. The Tamils are an ethnic minority, an affluent minority in the country of Sri Lanka, and for a long time they've been hated for their success and kicked around in their country. The Lebanese. The Lebanese have done business all over the world, but in particular, the Lebanese do a lot of business in the British possessions of Africa. So they were the intercessors between the local Africans and the British Empire. Probably the most famous middleman minority is the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. And finally, Jewish people, mostly in Western and Eastern Europe, but also in North Africa and Central Asia, the Middle East. So here's what all these groups have in common. They arrived to a region as poor immigrants who didn't speak the language. They had exceptional work ethic. They were family oriented, and they were willing to do the jobs that the majority population, the local population, either refused to do or didn't know existed. After a couple of generations, they rose to success, but the locals viewed them as parasites and bloodsuckers, and it was the type of hatred that culminated in the Armenian genocide and the European Holocaust.
So that the question is, why this particular kind of people are the targets of so much venomous hatred? And I think the answer is that they not only succeed, they succeed in a way which is a threat to the egos of other people. That is, you can envy a Rockefeller, but he's no threat to your ego, because you say, listen, anybody can be rich if he's born a Rockefeller. But the guy who comes here, let's say from Vietnam or Korea, and arrives here with little more than the clothes on his back and a few words of broken English, and a decade later he has his own little business, and you see his son a few years after that getting ready to go off to Harvard or MIT, you got to ask yourself, you either got to, you've got to hate yourself for saying, my God, I've been stagnating, this guy was nothing and now he's risen up, or you're going to have to hate him. And most people, when they have a choice between hating others and hating themselves, they hate others.
There's another theory on anti-Semitism that I stumbled onto, and it comes by way of a book called The Parasitic Mind by Saad. In it, there's a section in which the author presents research that analyzes the Islamic religion. And the findings from that research seem to indicate that there are negative attitudes toward Jews woven into the texts and the religious writings. And no doubt there is indeed disparaging language about Jews. There's even talk of actually murdering Jews specifically. And these texts are part of one of the major world religions, the Quran, the Hadith, and the Suri. The Suri is the autobiography of Muhammad, all of which were written in the 7th century Arabian Peninsula. Now, in the research that this book is citing, all the statements that contained Jew hatred were counted up and calculated, and it turned out Jew hate made up 9.3% of the writing. To put that into perspective, Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler contained 7.4% Jew hate. That's less. Now take a leap forward into the 1930s, and there was a guy called al-Husseini. He was the Grand Mufti. He was a Palestinian Arab chieftain. Well, al-Husseini met with Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, and they compared notes. They found some common interests, and they discovered that they were rather like-minded on the topic of anti-Semitism. Meanwhile, in Mandatory Palestine, there were Palestinian Arabs launching pogrom-style attacks against Jewish villages. There was looting and rioting and bombing of Palestinian Jews. Now, of course, there was a time, and this went on for hundreds of years, in which it was Christian Europe that was much more hostile and cruel toward Jewish people. They blamed them for plagues and for famines. And to escape that, many Jewish people actually went to the Ottoman Empire for the purpose of tolerance. But that was a long time ago. And here in the modern world, most of the cruelty and the hostility toward Jewish people actually comes from Arab and Islamic regions in the world. So before Zionism, before the partition, before the state of Israel, anti-Semitism was there. Now, why has it been with us for so long? I think it's partly because of their success as a middleman minority. I think also to an extent it's baked into the religion. And I also think that there are enough people with conspiratorial minds who are looking for a scapegoat. If you made it this far into the video and you found any of this information useful or interesting, thanks for watching. And if you didn't like it, sorry I wasted your time.